Shut up and sit down.
I'm Alexofalltrades, and this is the PreWatch thoughts for Dallas Buyers Club. Will this be sad? I think this will be sad. So sad. If you haven't noticed by now, I'm not always into Oscar bait. I find these kinds of movies to be hit or miss on the emotional context and cinematography. Does that mean this one will not have the emotional impact and focus too much on interesting and dynamic cinematography, which is actually just obscure a la Arrival? I'm not sure. I'm willing to give it a shot. I like Matthew McConaughey because he often brings it all to his performances, even with that accent everyone seems to hate. I will say that I'm sick of Jared Leto, so I'm not sure how his performance is going to sit with my stomach. I'm never a fan of the actors who think acting like the character outside of recording is how they give a good performance, because it's just not true. These method actors rarely internalize their performances, and I hate watching an actor act versus watching an actor disappear and a character take their place. Jennifer Garner also stars, but I don't see this as a worthy addition nor a detractor. I will not hold Daredevil and Elektra against her. This was directed by Jean-Marc also known for the much made fun of Wild on the Gilmore Girls: A Year in the Life. The writers were Craig Borton and Melissa Wallach. Borton with very little in his credits, and Wallach with a writing credit to the Aaron Eckhart starring Meet Bill, and a screen story credit to Mirror Mirror, favorite of mine. This movie is up in the air for me. I'm not picturing enjoying it, but it could surprise me. This is the PostView review for Dallas Buyers Club. It took me so long to get around to writing this one because health rights are the surest way to send me into a rant. This is basically a true story, and the crap Ron Woodruff and people like him had to put up with is enraging to me. For some backstory, in the 70s, a law that prevented profit on healthcare was revoked. After that, all hell broke loose. The AIDS epidemic came along, and pharmaceutical companies saw a way to make a profit. Every epidemic in our country means possible profit. So an American company saw a way to take a toxic, shelved cancer medicine and repurpose it as an AIDS medication. The FDA rushed the testing, and you can say that's because there was an epidemic, but here's the thing. The FDA is paid by companies to test their drugs and approve them. It's a cut for the government, not a public safety process. If no one had to pay the FDA, we could trust their opinion, but there were a bunch of other drugs that could help, but they weren't rushed through approval because the companies and organizations that were behind those drugs didn't go through the FDA process yet. This movie just went over everything I hate about healthcare. Doctors don't know enough, but act like they know everything, and the government doesn't like people to make their own informed opinions about their healthcare. The movie manages to cover all of this in a very interesting manner without being a documentary or pedantic. It teaches with a real-life and heartbreaking example, and I can see why McConaughey won an Oscar for this one, and certain other actors did a great job too. Dallas Buyers Club shows a side of the AIDS epidemic we don't typically see. Unlike Rent or Angels in America that focus on either homosexual men or drug abusers, this movie shows what it was like for a heterosexual man. I'm not saying that Rent or Angels in America aren't good. They are. What I'm saying is that the AIDS epidemic hit heterosexual non-drug abusers because before the epidemic, a lot of people weren't using condoms and medical professionals weren't using sanitation and disease protection across the board. I heard of a group of dental patients that got it from their dentist who didn't wear gloves. Then there was the whole blood transfusion issue. Though I seriously think that they need to stop banning homosexual men from giving blood at this point. It's been decades and sexuality is far more fluid than they seem to think it is. There have got to be a lot of gay men who don't have AIDS. Like, a lot. Okay, sidebar over. Dallas Buyers Club doesn't just focus the story around any heterosexual man, but a complicated one who tried to usurp the fucked up American healthcare system by getting AZT during the trial period under the table because he didn't qualify, by bringing different drugs into the country from Mexico and elsewhere that were less dangerous than the dosage of AZT that they had been giving to patients, and by selling those drugs to others under the table. This is great, even if he was a jerk sometimes. sometimes. But that was part of what was so interesting in Dallas Buyers Club. Ron was a complicated person. He wasn't a very good guy. A lot of the time, he could be rude, sexist, and homophobic. But then again, he made it his crusade to provide better treatment to the people in his community, some of the very people he seemed to hate. It turned out to be more important to him than their sexuality. He grew as a person. I've always thought that McConaughey was amazing, but he really shows it in this movie. At the point when he talked about what he had wanted for his future, I almost cried. His performance is just stellar. He got dangerously thin for some scenes, but not as dangerously thin as Christian Bale did for The Machinist. I hope actors know that they are doing serious damage to their hearts every time they get this thin. It doesn't matter that they gain the weight back. The damage is done. It's even worse than being overweight for years. Seriously, I just looked it up and adjusted for covariables. The risk of cardiovascular disease was greater for those underweight than those overweight or obese. So it may be easier to detect cardiovascular disease in overweight and obese patients due to both the common knowledge that they are at risk and because they typically have other risk factors, but just being underweight is a greater risk factor than just being overweight or obese. So even if it makes for great filmmaking, I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's something we should be encouraging in actors. Jared Leto also performs differently than he does elsewhere. He's actually watchable here, even likable. That's kind of a surprise to me because even after this movie, Leto still gives some crappy performances. But in his career, his performance in Dallas Buyers Club kind of sticks out as being very good. More like his performance in Requiem for a Dream. Not at all like his Joker. His performance also evoked emotion. I was frustrated with him, which was the intent, and then saddened. Like I said, this movie is sad, but the ending isn't impossibly sad, so it's not too much. The dialogue and little bits of characterization are also all very real, such as Ron's first reaction to being told by the doctors that he is HIV positive, and then his reaction in the library to learning that unprotected heterosexual intercourse can also spread the infection. That moment is so shocking, but real. I'm debating over whether or not to actually include it in this video. I mean, I guess you could go find it yourself, or you could watch this great movie for yourself and allow the moment to roll over you as it was meant to happen. So no, I won't include it here. Just know it's visceral and intense and just so real. Like most based on true story movies, Dallas Buyers Club does not have a major dramatic question. Instead of knowing what I'm waiting for, I'm on this journey in this person's life. To be honest, I still believe these are better suited to documentaries than films, or at the least, all the names changed and a new fictional story inspired by real events made instead. Dallas Buyers Club, due to its lack of a major dramatic question, and much like other based on true story movies, lacks focus. It covers a long range of years, and it feels like the movie could go on forever, basically up until Ron Woodruff dies. However, Dallas Buyers Club balances this problem with extremely engaging dialogue and performance. So what could be a catastrophe is only just an issue. So Dr. Eve Sachs and Rayon are not real people. They did not exist. They are instead representative of doctors and AIDS patients that existed in the real world, at which point I think then make a completely fictional story. These half measures drive me nuts. Real, but not really. Ugh, it's annoying. I know some people argue, but then they're not telling Ron Woodruff's story. But they already aren't. A tight and realistic story would have been his court battle against the FDA. That's a peak moment. Instead, the film covers most of his time before this. If they instead wanted to cover more of his actual life, then don't make up people and make a documentary. There is still an Oscar for documentaries. I cannot say that word. Now it's time for spoilers, so skip ahead for my rating. Rayon's death is really sad. I mean, it felt very obvious as she was incredibly self-destructive. She didn't seem to have any real hope except for Ron and the club, even going so far as to dress as a man to see her father. That scene was painful. I felt so bad for her. The other scene that I want to talk about that I didn't want to reveal was the part where the heterosexual woman comes to join the club and Ron is asking why she is there. When he finds out that she also has AIDS, the shock on his face face is amazing. But the very next scene, we see that the two of them have sex. And it was in that moment that I realized that since his diagnosis, Ron hadn't had sex with anyone. I already thought when he didn't have sex with either of the hookers after his diagnosis, when he didn't even really believe that he had HIV, that maybe Ron wasn't such a bad person after all. Because even if he didn't think he had it, he wasn't going to risk giving it to others. But then so much else happens after he believes in the diagnosis that I totally forgot about sex. He was too busy for it. So was the story. But then when he finally has an opportunity to have sex without the worry of spreading the disease, I realized he wasn't just too busy to have sex, he was making himself busy. He was avoiding it out of respect of his possible romantic partners. This, along with the fact that she's not real, is why we don't see a happy Eve and Ron get together ending. I do believe that love should still exist for people who have communicable diseases, but it is not going to be traditional. The lack of a romantic ending is very poignant. It fits. Despite my bias and issues with the based on true story genre of film, Dallas Buyers Club is one of the better ones. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you do. It's worth your time and it doesn't end too sadly. I bounced back and forth between a 9 and a 10 for this movie, so I decided to just land in the middle and say 9.5. It's great. It's nearly perfect. But because it doesn't have a major dramatic question, I could see how a viewer could not be impacted by the journey. They may not be able to grab on, especially considering the weight of the themes and issues of the film. Dallas Buyers Club, well worth the pain. This was PostView Review, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share, subscribe, click that bell, leave a comment below, visit my blog at empatheticwriter.wordpress.com, and follow me on Patreon for exclusive content and a shout out on a video. Merch, 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 merch. Yeah! Check out my new shop at cafepress.com/Alexofalltrades for all kinds of products with my face on them.